Welcome to WYCD Wicked, that stands for What You Can Do. When I did that intro, I thought I would have the blue suit jacket a lot more, but man, it got chilly in here. Oh well. Welcome to the show. So delighted to have you. I already see we got some folks. In the audience. Awesome. I won't drag the intro out too long. Just want to do some housekeeping up top. It is going to be an extraordinarily sporadic show over the next couple of days. I will try to have it up at what is becoming the usual time, which is 8 p.m. Eastern time. But I will be dog sitting. Not a very interesting story, but it does change the streaming setup somewhat. Let us jump directly into it, because it was a great deal of fun putting together some of these today, and then very sad with another one. But let's get it started with a little teasing. The good folks of the judicial system are somehow holding their heads high and still obeying the law in this, or still following the law as written in this bizarre time in which we live. And the result is that laws written by the GOP are now biting the GOP directly in their butts. With exactly the details on that, we've got Bo of the Fifth Column. And because I didn't hit record just then, I'm going to take another whack at that intro, but it'll be a lot faster. Isn't it funny how the GOP continually comes up with reasons for their legislation that have nothing to do with the principles they claim to have? They come up with legislation that is convenient to whatever they were trying to panic their constituents about in a given month. But the problem with conducting yourself like that is that eventually the contradictions crop up, and they can even crop up in a court of law. Here's Bo of the Fifth Column pointing out a recent snafu that the GOP brought upon itself entirely. Here's Bo telling us about it.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again.
Hey, Bo.
So today we are going to talk about how the Republican Party often gets in its own way in entertaining ways. And we will talk about a pretty interesting scenario that has developed in Wyoming most recently, but it has happened in other places. So we have talked lately on the channel about how the Republican Party introduces wild legislation for the purposes of just energizing their base. It's a show. We have talked about this in particular in relation to the U.S. House of Representatives and how it's very likely that they're going to introduce a bunch of very extreme legislation that maybe it makes it through the Senate, but Biden will veto it, and the Republicans do not have the votes to override the veto.
We talk about it on this channel too. I've heard it talked about on all kinds of channels. It bears repeating. It is very important to understand the difference between the show legislation that goes on and actual party goals. Also, because we tend to go just a little bit deeper right here on this channel, because we're going that next step and telling you what you can do, you have to have a more detailed understanding of the field. I just want to point out that is the big confusion with MAGA. or the big problem with MAGA for the GOP. The GOP traditionally has tried to minimize the amount of actual legislation that they have to do to support those wacky things that they say are problems. For example, when they say that the gays are coming for your kids, they prefer to keep that as rhetoric because it's a headache. And they want to save all their political capital, if they can, for doing their main goal, which is tax cuts for their wealthy friends and themselves, and deregulation for their wealthy friends and for themselves. However, the big problem the GOP is having with MAGA is that MAGA is built entirely on these issues, entirely on the fluff that the GOP normally uses to disguise the thievery that they are getting up to. Problem there, meaning they have to make way more legislative efforts towards getting this stuff done. There's your background.
The habit, the tendency of the Republican Party to just manufacture some problem out of whole cloth and then propose a solution to it, that's not new. It's been around a really long time. And what they tend to do is they create some mythical scenario. This horrible thing is going to happen. And then they propose legislation to stop this horrible thing from happening that never would have happened to begin with. And then when it doesn't happen, it looks like their legislation was successful.
Ooh, I'm going to, for once, keep it where I froze it initially. Bo looks like a badass post-apocalyptic cowboy there. Okay, so I just want to also stress the similarities and the differences between MAGA and progressives here. Think about that for a moment. MAGA is the portion of the Republican Party which is entirely focused on the things that the party is most anxious to say they're all about. They used to be more about the tax cuts, but I think the populace has caught on to the fact that tax cuts really means tax cuts for the rich, and it doesn't fly as well as it used to. So MAGA is entirely built around these other issues, bigotry against trans people, bigotry against brown people of any shade, bigotry against basically anybody who's not a white Christian. However, that annoys the GOP because they're like, damn it, guys, don't you get you knuckleheads, don't you get why we're really here? We're here to rob America. Just rob America. Stop shining such a light on this other stuff that we say we're about. We don't really want to do that. We just want to rob America. Here's the dangerous thing. And it requires the maturity to understand it. The progressives are that to the Democrats. You want to know why the Democrats go so hard against progressives? Way harder than they're willing to go against conservative Republicans or straight up MAGA folks? That's why. Because progressives focus on the issues that Democrats actually say they're about all the time. Unfortunately, just like the GOP, conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin, for example, Kristen Sinema always deserves to be said in the same breath. They are not there to do anything, if they can help it, except rob America. Rob you, rob me. They are there to give tax cuts to the wealthy. They are there to give massive deregulation conceits to the corporations in exchange for money. That's the system we have now. By the way, refer to our Get Big Money Out of Politics stream to talk about that. But why am I in this video about teasing the GOP? Why am I spending so much time talking about the similarities between progressives and MAGA? Because you need to understand the resistance we're going to face and where it's going to come from when we try to push progressive policies. If you ever get baffled that Democrats can't seem to vote together on something like that, there always seems to be, there's just something wrong with this bill, just a little tweak I want to make. And then we all start disagreeing again. That's why. And it's the same frustration that MAGA has, except they start saying, Rhino, Republican in name only. Totally oblivious to the fact that they are, in fact, Republican in name only, the MAGA folks. And the reality is, real Republicans do exactly what Mitch McConnell wants to do at any given time. You should know that going into this story and any political situation. There are the loyalties, and there lie the loyalties, and there lies the source of most of our conflicts. I want to make clear as well the key difference between MAGA and progressives. MAGA policies are designed to attack people, and they are not based on any solid fact whatsoever. I have literally never seen a MAGA policy that starts with, well, this reputable place came out with a study, and nobody disagrees with the findings of the study, and now we've got a logical suggestion for what we're going to do about it. Not a once. You know, it's Sith and Jedi, folks. They are. You can't deny the similarities in their methods. They're both wielding those lightsabers and guided by the Force. But don't think they're friends, and don't think they have the same goals. They don't. That said, you should know what those similarities are. And it will knowing that will help you appreciate this story a great deal. Because here we have those mean-spirited things MAGA was trying so hard to do, biting them in the butt. I'm going to let Bo go for a while.
They have been doing this a very long time.
True. Also, I've said a while and I lied. Also worth noting, this is always, just like Democrats have always signaled that they feel a certain way about politics and then go ahead and give tax breaks to corporations and deregulation, yada, yada, yada. Republicans have always done this performative outrage and then legislated against a problem that didn't exist. It's just that they have to do more of it now because a big chunk of their voting bloc, a big chunk of their politicians are now committed solely to these things and campaign solely on these things and put the focus almost entirely on these things. But the reactions that the GOP, the old school GOP have to this, pay attention to them because you will see them mirrored when progressives actually make progress.
It's a good election strategy. It works. The Republican base is not necessarily great at discerning what is a real and what is a fictional problem. So it works for them when it comes to electoral success. However, while the problems are imaginary and the legislation is just a show, the legislation is real. And it has real effects. Sometimes the effects of their show legislation end up being in direct opposition to the Republican Party on the rare occasions when they actually do have policy. A hilarious example of this just occurred in Wyoming. As some of you may know, Wyoming, they put through a pretty comprehensive ban on family planning. And then it went to the courts. The ban is currently not being enforced because back in the early 2010s, I want to say 2012, Wyoming introduced a bill, a constitutional amendment, to stop all of the horrible things that were going to occur because of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Part of this kind of prohibited a government takeover of healthcare. So when it goes before the judge is like, hey, can you explain to me how this isn't healthcare? I mean, it has to be done by a licensed medical professional. And they were like, huh? And because of the constitutional amendment that they put in place for an imaginary issue, they have successfully defeated their own legislation. Now, currently, this is a temporary thing. But reading through it, it's going to be really hard for them to argue through this. And even the judge kind of indicated that they believed it was the Republican Party trying to do an end run around the state constitution. Which, I mean, yeah, that is kind of what they're doing. But they just didn't expect their constitutional amendment to, I don't know, ever be used.
Yeah, it's almost like they've been lying to their constituents the entire time. It's almost like that, isn't it?
Now, this sounds like a one-off scenario. It's not. This happens more often than you might imagine. In fact, in Ohio, due to a 2011 constitutional amendment about health care, because, you know, they scared everybody about Obamacare. I'm sorry, the Affordable Care Act. As most Republicans will tell you, those are two very different things. Obamacare is bad and evil. The Affordable Care Act is what they use to get their health care, and that's good. Anyway,
just for the record, odds are you got that, but just for the record, they are the exact same thing. It's just they just use a different name when they feel differently about it. I did want to say just one thing. So the Republicans of yesteryear also ran into this problem from time to time, but it's happening way more now. Part of that is because the MAGA crop, the new folks, which I think you could arguably say is very much the Ohio Republicans as well as the Wyoming Republicans, they cannot tie their shoes in one go. They can't do much at all without fucking it up. And more importantly, they don't understand subtlety. So they are encountering this way more because they don't have the wherewithal. Like the old Republican Party in these states, when they had different leadership, would do things like look at the laws on the books and who put them there and consider what the legal case would look like and try to avoid embarrassing moments like this that makes Bo of the Fifth Column chuckle to himself. Doesn't happen with the MAGA-run Republican parties. And as you are getting extremists, in my own state as an embarrassing example of this, I'm sorry to say, extremists running these parties, you're also getting, no other way to put it, a bunch of knuckleheads in charge. So you will see more and more and more of these cases crop up, as we saw with Trump. And a judge is just left, even if the judge is completely corrupt, desperate to give them the win with the flimsiest of cases. You know, they end up looking at some laws and saying, look, this is directly in contrast to what the laws say we can do. And by the way, Republicans are the ones that put those laws on the books in the first place.
In Ohio, they did the same thing. They introduced the same kind of constitutional amendment, and it was also used to strike down their attempted ban there.
couldn't stand effective health care that would have been cheaper, introduced by a black president. Couldn't stand it. Were willing to fundamentally change how their states operated in order to get rid of it. And as a result, now that they're trying to take away rights from Americans, they are unable to because of the fundamental changes they put in place. Delicious.
Now, while all of this is humorous and
they're stumbling over their own jackboots,
does go to show how the Republican Party creates imaginary issues and then defeats them, what we do need to keep in mind is that this is actually very serious. You have a number of states trying to deprive people of rights, and the only thing that is standing in their way is their habit of lying to their base and introducing legislation for made-up problems that just happens to be useful to stop their authoritarian march. So while, sure, take the win, but remember that this is not a fight that's over. It's going to continue. We can only hope that the Republican Party continues to enshrine more rights into state constitutions to defeat imaginary issues with health insurance. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.
So you'll notice that in a lot of the solutions I propose, they are focused on affecting state-level politicians and leaning into the rights that the states have. It's not an accident. The reason for this is because you have had Republicans trying to get away with so much for decades and decades and decades via the state's powers, that in many cases they have expanded those states' powers. And there's no reason we can't use that. It's not a matter of where I think power should come from. It's where power currently exists. And currently, there's a ton of power in the states. I haven't even considered how I feel about where the power ought to be, because there's functionally no reason to have that conversation at this moment. Nothing we can do about it in the immediate future. It's not of more benefit to us currently to make a big deal over shifting things towards yada, yada, yada. But right now, the fact is, you have a ton of power at the state level, and you should use that. It's also easier to influence politicians at the state level, simply because the power of one vote is a bigger deal. 1,000 signatures on a petition that's going to go to a national politician is going to have a lot less effect as 1,000 signatures going to a district representative or going to a representative of the state Senate. So, I would generally recommend using your state level powers, but for this specifically, as Bo said, they've got in their own way already, and delightful, good. But it brings to mind the fact that we came this close to having universal health care in the United States. The first version of Obamacare would have been functionally close, not exactly, but close to Medicare for all. And it got pared down until it was basically useless, until it was just another way to find poor people. That's unfortunate. Yet, we can pressure our politicians to get Medicare for all put in place. Now is a great time to start, because I want as many politicians as we can running on this, running on support for Medicare for all in the primaries. And if they see that is a topic that will get them popular amongst voters, because voters are writing in and telling them about it, they are more likely to campaign on it. If they campaign on it, it's more likely to become part of the conversation. The politicians who weren't supporting it are going to get asked about it. And if they are on the left and they're being asked about it, it's going to pressure them to want to say the answer that they know will please their base, which is, yes, I support Medicare for all. So, tell your representatives, plain and simple, link in the description. Tell them you want them to support Medicare for all. Or you can phrase it universal health care. It's the same thing. We could also write our state-level politicians and say, I want residents of this state to have state-supported health care. That is not an unreasonable idea. Just like marijuana is getting legalized state by state by state. There's nothing stopping us from having a Tennessee-based healthcare system. Once you're a resident of Tennessee for a full year, you're on the healthcare system. Suddenly, you don't have to spend any more money on healthcare. Same for, we could have a Michigan Medicare for all. We could have an Ohio Medicare for all, until there's so many states that have it, and nobody wants to live in these states where you've got to pay out the wazoo to these crazy health insurance companies. It just becomes inevitable for it to be a 50-state initiative. So, what can you do? Tell your representatives at all levels that you want them to support Medicare for all. Tell your national representatives that you want them to support it at the national level. Tell your state representatives that you want them to pitch it at the state level. It is about time that the citizens of the United States of America joined the rest of the civilized world with a civilized healthcare system. Let's read some comments. Oh, good to see y'all. Mars Falcon. I get a kick out of Bo's wardrobe sometimes. I always check to see if he has a subliminal or directly in your face extra message on his shirt. Ever make mistakes in life? Well, GOP, do ya? Yeah, I love the little hidden messages there. It is an aspiration to mimic that if I ever have the wherewithal to plan that far ahead. Mars Falcon says, death panels are coming, right-wingers. See y'all in the FEMA camps. Yeah. John McDonough says, there was a poll taken somewhere and people didn't know the difference. Many respondents didn't know that Obamacare was the Affordable Care Act. Just saying. Yeah. There has been a right-wing messaging apparatus that has just been vastly superior to the left-wing messaging apparatus, because in this country, for basically the last 30 years leading up to this moment, leading up to like the 2010s, you had talk radio being vastly right-wing. You had Fox News being a straight-up propaganda outlet for the right wing. And then you had corporate-friendly media doing the news for everybody else. And so what you got was a left-wing chunk of America that had no real go-to media outlet, getting their news from these very pro-corporate, obviously, because they are corporate media, very pro-corporate sources. And you had the right wing getting right-wing propaganda from multiple sources. So culturally, America's doing a lot of catching up over these last few years. And fortunately, we're finally starting to see the positive side of that. But yes, it's been it has led to things like people having no idea what Obamacare even was. Humor is good, says John McDonough. Good. Yes, wholeheartedly agreed. The Democratic Senate and executive is standing in the way as well as being stupid. Oh, hell yeah. John McDonough says, my hell yeah as to this. I wrote my U.S. Senator 8 days ago, used the government webpage, and asked that they initiate a Senate investigation into the conduct of Congress. Hell yeah. Interference in Trump prosecution. No response whatsoever yet. I wouldn't expect a response, but that doesn't mean they didn't get it. That's excellent. That, multiplied over time, is going to achieve results. That is how we get to the place where our voices are respected, our opinions are respected. They will take them seriously when they see that kind of consistency. This is brand new to lefties. It is totally culturally normal for right-wingers, and it's hear me out on the right-wing, left-wing thing, but it's totally culturally normal for people that tend to vote Republican to be very vocal, and it is not culturally normal for anybody else to be vocal. That is something that the sane people in the country need to take from the crowd that became the Tea Party and became MAGA and became all these other things. We need to get as fired up about reality as they do about their twisted fantasies. I'm delighted, John McDonough. Well done. Let's lighten it up. We got to talk about Florida Man. Well, it's a day that ends in Y, which means there has been another mass shooting in the United States. I've been trying to make an oath, or make good on an oath, not to get overly emotional about this stuff. Because, you'll have to excuse me, it would appear that we are going to detour into a darker subject matter first. That is the order in which I have this loaded. I apologize, because I think we are past the point of that having any value. That said, not gonna lie, it grates on me quite a bit. But in staying unemotional, it has helped to really clarify what needs to be done about this. And I'll tell you up front, right here, right now, I'm going to tell you on the other side of the reporting on this as well, which we'll show from MSNBC. We have had the same problems for decades. And we have had examples of things that we have done that have helped. Not stopped them completely, but helped. And we have also been talked out of those solutions. So what can you do about mass shootings? I'll tell you right now. You need to get a blue trifecta. House, Senate, and White House. And then, it doesn't even stop there. Then once we have that, a massive campaign of pressure to ban assault weapons. I believe it is possible to get a bipartisan push to ban assault weapons. I genuinely believe we could make that happen. But in looking at the field and in looking at the effort it's going to take to make this happen and being dispassionate about this problem, I have to be honest in that I see a faster path to accomplishing that in simply defeating the GOP. Republicans are the reason we have mass shootings. Republicans are the reason we have police doing 21st century lynchings of black Americans. What we need to do to end these problems is obvious and has been known for a long, long time. But Republicans, much like in our first segment, are over-invested in the nonsense they use to distract from the problems. They are also thoroughly paid off by the NRA, who has an interest in continuing the mass shootings, for which they get a spike in gun sales every time one happens. Every time a mass shooting happens, the NRA profits. And they use a small portion of those profits to bribe our politicians and to keep the mass shootings going. So, what do we have to do? We need the blue trifecta in 2024. Once we get that, we need to push like crazy to resolve these problems. Where was this most recent shooting? Who were the victims? Who died because we didn't act? Doesn't really matter. But because they died, we have an obligation to learn a little bit about them. So here it is.
Charles, you know, crime has become a huge talking point. It certainly was in 2020. It was again in 2022 in many of the local state races that occurred. We've already been hearing it, right, in 2024. We hear a lot of criticism from the right on big cities, the crimes there, in some cases where crime has gone up, particularly where they have a Democratic mayor or a Democratic governor. And yet what we don't hear is a lot of proposals about the first point that the commissioner made, which is access to guns.
Absolutely, Chris. It amazes me and infuriates me at the same time. While we have this very disingenuous conversation about stopping and lowering violent crime across America, somehow during that discussion, even as ingenuous and disingenuous as it is, there is some way that we carve out an exception where we gloss over the notion of school shootings as part of that conversation. And that's infuriating because in order to have that conversation, there are essentially three elements. There is the element of guns and the access that people have to them and their availability. There's the element of people.
To pause it there for a moment. Element of guns, GOP has come down thoroughly on not wanting to do anything about. All right, next up, element of people. What's he talking about?
And the issue around mental health, as the commissioner was just talking about, we don't know.
They talk very highly, actually, Republicans do, of mental health. When it comes to funding it in any way, they always, every single time vote against it. They have voted their opinion. Their opinion is to do nothing about it. What is the third issue? In this
specific instance, how much of a role that did or did not play, but what we do know from a history, an unfortunate.
There is nobody who decides to shoot up a room full of people that is mentally healthy.
Long history of these sorts of events that it is something that usually does become a part of the conversation.
Unless it's the film Inglourious Bastards.
And then finally, there's the conversation about schools. When you're talking about that, you got guns, you have people, and you have schools.
The suggestions the GOP have around schools are nothing but nonsense. These are the people that wanted to arm teachers. I respect a lot of the teachers that I've had. I did not respect all of the teachers that I had. And I would not trust all of my teachers to carry a fucking gun in the classroom. In fact, if I would have had a teacher with a firearm in the classroom, I simply wouldn't have attended that class out of protest. Because that's an insane suggestion. The politicians who suggested arming teachers as an answer to school shootings should never again be allowed to hold office. And I do note that that talking point evaporated after Uvalde. Never let them forget Uvalde. When they talk about a good guy with a gun, remind them of the cowardice of the Uvalde police. It's an unreasonable expectation to put on anyone. The problem is the guns.
And unfortunately, in this conversation about crime prevention, and addressing it, we would rather change everything about the school than to address the issues that people are having with mental health or dare touch the issues that people have around access to guns. We would rather put more police in schools, metal detectors, bulletproof classrooms, all sorts of things that socialize our young people in ways that are just unthinkable, before we begin to tackle the tougher and real and direct problems that are causing these sorts of situations to happen.
The argument on the other side to you, Charles, and you've heard it before, so you know it is, you're politicizing this issue.
I'm politicizing it just as much as...
One thing I would like us to start addressing is that right there. When people say you're politicizing the issue, what they are trying to say is they don't want to talk about it anymore. That's what they're really saying. They don't want to talk about it. Don't politicize the issue. We're trying to come to an agreement to not do anything here. Politics are the answer. Policy is the answer to this issue. We need to change the policies in this country. We need to change the laws in this country. And when people try to dissuade you from that point, and look, this is something where MAGA folks and traditional GOP will come down on the same side. You're not going to have that division. You're going to have a united front. So you can expect anybody that votes red in the U.S. I realize our friends from around the world will be slightly confused by that. In the U.S., red is right wing. Blue is left wing. Just about everywhere else, it's the opposite. That was a hell of a thing for me to encounter. But when you come across people that vote Republican and they start saying, don't politicize the issue, remind them that it is our duty to come up with an answer for this. And remind them that other countries around the world are not dealing with this. This is a United States problem, which means the United States is structured in a way where we sacrifice our children. There is nothing so good about the United States that it's worth letting our children die over. There are those of us who live here who would argue that the United States is a B-plus country at best in its current state. There are those of us who would argue it deserves a lower grade. There are even those of us who would argue that it's an A-plus country. But no country that requires its children to be killed regularly, in their classrooms no less, deserves to exist. This is a country where if it were true of any other country, let's say a small Middle Eastern country, that their children were regularly massacred in their schools, we would put economic sanctions on them. We would not invite them to their leaders to the White House to come talk to us. We would rightly treat that country like a pariah. There is nothing worth preserving in the United States above our children's lives.
As those House members who decided that it was a good idea to wear AR-15 lapel pins and walk around Congress as if these things weren't happening, where are they right now? What's going to be their statement? Because we don't need another round of thoughts and prayers.
Yes.
And so when you talk about politicizing this, show me what your priorities are. Show me how you are constructing budgets that are intended to address the health and well-being from a mental and psychological place of American citizens. Show me in a real way, beyond sort of just throwing more money, more metal detectors, bulletproof classrooms, arming teachers, these solutions that essentially only feed the violence that is in America's DNA.
Yeah. And the question we should be asking our politicians when they put up ridiculous suggestions like that: does England have to make its classrooms bulletproof? Does Canada need to arm its teachers to the teeth? Does Canada require a small militarized security force in its schools just to keep the children alive? Canada's a pretty well-run country. England's a pretty well-run country. Ireland's a pretty, the part of it that's not part of the UK is a pretty well-run country. Do these countries require these steps? No, they don't. Why are we looking at fantastical steps that would cost a tremendous amount of money that, frankly, we have no proof whatsoever would work? Why are we looking at those steps before we're looking at what other countries already do? Look at the through line for these countries. I would rather my nieces and nephews go to school in those countries. I'll tell you, their Uncle Jake's real worried, because I got a new batch of nieces and nephews, and they're about to go into school. I don't want the laws we have on the books to be there alone to protect them, because we have seen they don't work. So ask the people that put forth those ridiculous propositions. Ask them, do other countries have to do that? The answer is, of course, no.
Where is your concern there? Until then, you can't talk to me about politicizing this, because all you've done is roll something else by another name.
But you don't think this is going to in any way change the narrative around violence or guns or school shootings in America, do you?
Unfortunately, it won't, Chris. And I think that like I said, we will likely see a greater push to change everything about this conversation other than access to guns. Because, of course, there's the rallying cry of this is not a guns issue, this is a people issue.
And what that means is that nothing will change.
Well, then what are we doing about people? That becomes my immediate question. How are we investing in opportunities and spaces that are going to address that from a people end, as opposed to focusing on schools and all sorts of other issues? I think that this is a very unfortunate space, and we've learned over and over again, whether it's Uvalde, whether it's Sandy Hook, we do not have the type of regard for the lives of our children and our educators and their safety and public safety in such a way that is going to move this needle. And until that becomes a priority, Chris, this is not going to be a conversation that really moves anywhere forward at the type of speed or pace that it needs to.
That last part he said. Until that becomes part of this conversation. Republicans have made it crystal clear there is no amount of carnage. There is no amount of dead children. There is no amount of terror that Americans can endure that will convince them to go against the will of the people who have bribed them. Republicans made that clear. You know what? A lot of Democrats took those bribes too. Any Democrat who brags about their NRA rating, they're not our friends. They are the problem. What can you do? First of all, shave off those Democrats who would dare take a dime from the NRA. Get rid of them. Vote in primaries. Thing number 2 that you can do. Get the blue trifecta in 24. Enough. Enough of this. My whole life was this. My whole youth was wondering, will today be the day? Did the kid we weren't paying attention to crack today? Why is Bill not in class? Is he loading up? Imagine that. United States of America. Myself, all my classmates grew up in the era of Columbine and beyond. A lot of folks don't even remember Columbine. That became the next one and the next one, and then Sandy Hook, and then the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. I don't even recall the name of this most recent school where the shooting happened. I believe it was some sort of a Christian school. I don't know. Gets lost. There's so many dead children. Enough. Republicans have made it clear. They will not only not help, they will do everything in their power to make sure that this keeps happening. They know. They have the same data we do. They know they're causing this. Now we need to show that we know. We need to make a decision. Even if you believe that somehow, in the age of drones and F-16s, somehow the ability to kill 30 people at once instead of just 2 or 3 with a handgun, that's keeping the government at bay. We don't deserve to keep our government at bay. We don't deserve our freedom. If that's what it takes to buy our freedom isn't worth it. It's not worth our kids' lives. But you know what? I think you'll find that that is a bunch of crap. The guns do not give us more freedom. They give us less freedom. Because I don't know if my wacky neighbor's kid is going to march into my nephew's school and kill him. Because he had a bad week in the United States of America, where somebody with zero training can get an assault rifle, military weapon, and they won't even be asked, "Do you have any priors? How you feeling today? How's your mental health today?" Republicans are going to keep making this happen, so we need the one group who can be pushed on this, the Democrats. And again, they're not a flawless group, as I have tried to make clear. They're not flawless. We need them in office so that we can push them and we can get this done. Links in the description. Vote. Vote in the primaries. Vote in the general election. Yeah, sorry, we had to take it to a maudlin place there. But got to address it. Again, I want to congratulate John McDonough for writing his senator. That is the kind of energy, the kind of action we need. I congratulate you, sir. Thank you. And by the way, thank you for, I didn't mention it before, thank you for the email you sent. Highly appreciated. So, I think we have earned a little bit of levity for the third part of the show here. As promised before, here is a story about Florida Man, brought to you by Legal Eagle. I do love that channel. Love any opportunity to show it here. And certainly I think we need a light one. Here we go. I hear a lot of talk about Florida Man and a lot of making fun of Florida in general for the behavior of Floridians who break the law. And fair enough. Fair enough. The stories are hilarious and certainly worthy of a chuckle. But I'm concerned that it will result in the kind of embarrassment that might actually cause Florida to undo some very good laws. You see, the reason, and I have harped on this since my radio days, the reason that Florida Man is a thing is not because people act crazier in Florida. Don't get me wrong. People act crazier in Florida. I say this because Ron DeSantis is governor there. But at the same time, Maxwell Frost is a district representative. There is sanity in Florida. In fact, if you follow police blotters, you will find that just like Berry Gordy discovered all these wonderful musicians in Motown and was interviewed about how he managed to find all this talent and revealed that, in fact, this talent is everywhere. He was simply looking for it. Just like that. Florida has the same crazy in terms of the criminal class as everybody else. But their reporting laws are different. Now, I would love to take my best shot at telling you about it. But I have sworn not to waste your time with a folksy attempt when there is a better expert that I can get to tell you about it. And as it happens, the best internet expert on the law, the good fellow at Legal Eagle, talked about this very thing. Let's have a listen.
Ah, yes, Florida Man.
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 Florida Man. Mr. Florida.
Oh,
Who can forget classic Florida Man stories like Florida Man undergoing kidney dialysis is upset that he can't bring life-size cutout of President Trump for emotional support during his treatments. Florida Man threatens to kill man with kindness, uses machete named Kindness. Florida man accused of stealing gator from golf course threw it around to teach it a lesson. For every U.S. state, people have formed some stereotypes about the people who live there. For Oregon, people may unfairly assume it's full of Portlandia hipsters. For Texas, people might unfairly assume folks are just one unkind word away from going full Yosemite Sam.
No, that's true.
You skunks, clear out of here!
But whenever you hear the name Florida man, it conjures up a certain image of swamps, beer, and lawless shamelessness. And I'm not talking about Mar-a-Lago. But what if I told
I just want to give you an example of what I was talking about earlier. In my, going back to radio reporting days, in my radio reporting days, I did a story about a guy who stopped a home invasion with a battle axe. And incidentally, he looked just like a Viking. He had the big Viking beard. This is a Michigan man. He had the big Viking beard. Guy broke into his I think it was a house, might have been an apartment. Either way, guy broke in. He grabbed what was handy, which was, because he was a big damn nerd, just like your old pal Jake, not punching down there. He had a replica battle axe, and he used it. And the story was, the person was wounded but not mortally. And the big question was, is this guy going to get in trouble? Is this any different than using a firearm if it's a home invasion? And obviously he didn't get in trouble and it was all fine, but it was the kind of weird thing you would expect to hear in the Florida man case, in the Florida man reports. And the only reason we had access to that information is in the manner that we did here in Michigan, was because it wasn't the perpetrator that did the weird thing. It was the supposed victim that did the weird thing. But this stuff happens all the time. If you have any cop friends, ask them for their weird stories. And oh boy, get ready to hear some wild things. And by the way, I am of the belief that the genuine nemesis of the police officer is just alcohol. It's just alcohol. When people get drunk, they act wild.
That the overwhelming daily...
It's not me speaking out. Lord. Throwing stones at glass houses. That ain't Whiskey Jake saying you shouldn't drink alcohol. Just that you should be aware that you'll be crazy when you're drunk.
Of stories about Florida and their Florida antics isn't because Floridians are inherently weird and prone to getting caught doing ridiculous things. Really, the reason we hear so much about Florida has to do with something that should be the envy of all other states: Florida's radical commitment to open meetings and accessible public records. So let's discuss the phenomenon of Florida man, Florida woman, and Florida people, and how we owe Florida's open government laws for entertaining us with stories like SWAT team rescues Florida man from tree, Florida man blames Putin in attempt to avoid speeding ticket.
Oh, sure.
And so many more tales.
All right, I'm going to jump forward past a little bit of the nonsense. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Here's the good stuff.
You could just apply Florida man to your Google alerts. The general pattern of these stories involve headlines that are literally just Florida man followed by the absolutely bonkers thing that they are reported to have done. What kinds of things, you ask? Well, I'm so happy you asked, because these peculiar tales fall into several categories of Floridian woe. You've got your booze-related antics like...
Okay, all right. Come on. Son of a gun. Give me, he talks about, I swear to you, the reason here. And it's fascinating. All right.
Flimsy excuse to list as many Florida man and Florida woman stories as possible in one video. Yes. Now, I'm also
fine. That was a good joke.
Fresh meth tonight on dating profile Cyberstar. Florida woman bites camel's genitals to escape from animal after it sat on her. The camel did nothing wrong. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Devin, are you actually going to talk about some kind of pertinent legal issues here? Or is this just some flimsy excuse to list as many Florida man and Florida woman stories as possible in one video? Yes. Now, I'm also going to talk about all the crazy stuff that happens in all of the other states as well. We'll get to the law in a second. But the thing is, weird news stories exist in every state, and they're not hard to find. Texas man texts weed offer to cop, gets arrested. Arizona man selling ranch for...
Okay, these are too good not to let go. I'm going to keep letting them play, but I swear to you, he tells you the thing that is the end, that should be the envy of all their states. And I'm going to tell you, that we should all be pushing to have these same rules. But let's enjoy this for a minute. Come on.
$5 million due to constant alien attacks. Pennsylvania man facing assault charges over Big Mac. Connecticut man yells at bear until it leaves his kitchen. Missouri man helps start riot against self, will almost assuredly be re-elected senator after 3 more years in office. And yet, there seems to be a disproportionate amount of weird stories coming out of Florida. But there's actually a very good reason we hear about Florida so much in these viral news stories, and it's something that Florida actually has done very well that is worthy of praise that should be modeled by other states. I'm talking about Florida's robust public records laws enshrined by statute and constitutional amendments. As reported by the Miami New Times, ironically, one of the things that may be contributing to Florida being shamed so often in the national media is something all Floridians should be proud of. Since 1909, Florida has had a proud tradition that all government business is public business and therefore should be available to the public. That means all records, including photos and videos produced by a public agency, are easily accessible with a few narrow and obvious exceptions. Public officials are also required to open all of their meetings, even unofficial ones, to the public. So here's a quick recap of Florida's century-long tradition of open records laws. Florida passed its first public records law in 1909 with the aptly named Public Records Law. As stated by the Florida Public Records Law, quote, "It is the policy of the state that all state, county, and municipal records are open for personal inspection and copying by any person, providing access to public records is a duty of each agency. Under this law, all records made or received by any public agency in the course of official business are available for inspection unless subject to a specific exception or exclusion by the Florida legislature." And in the century that that law has been enacted, the definition of what constitutes a public record has expanded beyond the traditional written documents. And you know what public records are also subject to disclosure? Arrest reports, 911 calls, and mugshots with private info like address and phone numbers redacted. As a result,
to my knowledge, all of those mugshots were real. Yeah, I just want to say, think about the implications of that. Yes, okay, hilarious stories, sure. Embarrassment for the state as they become national stories for how ridiculous they are, sure. But one of the biggest pathways to corruption is secrecy. And particularly if your state is not gerrymandered. If you have districts that are drawn by a nonpartisan body, it can only benefit you. Now, I give that caveat because, yes, this can be turned into a crime wave narrative. But you should have nothing to fear from the truth. And if the state is obligated to make any piece of media that it creates available to the people who paid them to create that media, such as a mugshot, such as an arrest record, such as any business the state conducts, that can only be good in the long term. I highly, highly recommend that you pressure your representatives at the state level to adopt these laws. I mean, it's a little spoiler for the what you can do, but I will also say it's one of those things that has bipartisan support. You can, if it doesn't have one party specifically against it, you can just assume it has bipartisan support. Our legislators are too tired. They're too exhausted by all of the nonsense that they have brought upon themselves with lie upon lie upon lie and having to take a strong stance against X, Y, and Z because it's part of a bigger national conversation, that blah, 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 blah. They're exhausted by that. So if there's something that they can campaign about, if there's something that they can make their issue that doesn't yet have a bunch of baggage associated with it, doesn't already have a pre-programmed fight that's going to come their way in a group of lobbyists that's going to yada, 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 yada. There's something like that. they're going to be delighted by it. They're going to look at that and say, my God, something my constituents want me to do that isn't already part of a massive fight? Yes, please. I'll make that my thing. Sure. So before Republicans find a way to get their fangs in this is a good law. And I shouldn't even be harsh on Republicans here. You know what? Republicans are not actively against this. So, assume it's bipartisan. Doesn't matter who your representative is. You have an equal chance of getting them to make this an issue they'll pick up. Give it a shot. Let's hear a little more detail here.
Got access to Florida man stories like drunk Florida man kicked out of library, told cops he was Jason Bourne. Florida man with Florida tattoo on his forehead arrested for misuse of 911, marijuana possession. Florida man suspected of smelling woman's feet at library leads police on scooter chase. And in 1967, Tuesday, Florida expanded its open records laws even further with a passage of the government in the Sunshine Law. These provisions, commonly called the Sunshine Law, establish a basic right of access to most meetings of boards, commissions, and other governing bodies of state and local agencies and authorities. Subject to limited exemptions, the Sunshine Law dictates that no resolution, rule, or formal action taken by any governing body or board are legally binding unless their meetings comply with these requirements, which leads to the publication of Florida man stories like Florida man offered to pay officer with hamburger for oral sex, police say. Florida man tells police he's allowed to carry meth.
No word on whether or not the police took them up on the hamburger offer.
Ask the FBI. Florida man claims he was driving car with 2 missing tires because of a curse. And public officials who knowingly violate these sunshine laws are subject to a first-degree misdemeanor charge punishable by a fine of up to $1,000 and a jail term not to exceed 1 year. Now, an unintentional violation is a non-criminal fine of up to $500, and a public official who intentionally violates the public records law is subject to a suspension or removal from office. And attorney's fees and court costs are available to plaintiffs that prevail in a civil suit for access. And since 1967, Floridians have repeatedly voted to enshrine open government principles into the state constitution. Voters adopted the Sunshine Amendment in 1976, which required the full and public disclosure of the financial interests of all public officers, candidates, and employees. And in 1990, a constitutional amendment applying open meetings laws to the state legislature was overwhelmingly passed by the voters. And in 1992, voters amended the state constitution one more time to guarantee the openness in state government and expand public records laws to the judiciary. And as a result, Florida couldn't hide stories like Florida man accused of using Kool-Aid packets to steal nearly $1,000 in Walmart merchandise. Florida man arrested with pound of cocaine, some kept on stack of bacon.
My God, somebody put a medium-sized amount of cocaine on a stack of bacon.
Florida man sprays woman with roach spray, break out nunchucks over loud music. Now, and that's not to say that the laws are solely responsible for all of the crazy stories that come out of Florida. As highlighted by the New York Times in a report on the subject, some contributing factors to the Florida man phenomenon are the sheer size and diverse culture of the state. Florida is the third largest U.S. state, and with more people means more crime stories. The Times noted that drugs and the weather are also culprits.
I'm a just island boy. I'm a just island boy. Florida boy. I got a real damn tropical.
The steaminess adds to the seaminess.
Look, I consider myself somewhat an expert on the matter, coming from a state which is 2 peninsulas. Florida is not an island. It is a peninsula. Although now that I say that, I realize the man could be talking about being from the Florida Keys, but even then, it's an archipelago.
And outdoor living makes for easy viewing and recording. But the most important factor in Florida...
Also, heat. Fun fact. The hotter it is, the higher the crime will be on a given day. Look it up. It's a wild but true thing. But when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. People are outside interacting with each other. It's cold, you're home. Interacting with just your family, which is a whole different kind of crime sometimes.
Man's superhero origin story is the strength of Florida's public records laws. As reported by a local station in Tallahassee, under the Sunshine Act, the public and the media are given access to crime reports almost immediately after they happen, like the daily booking report, which is posted almost as soon as a person is booked into jail. That information allows reporters to detail the narratives quickly. Barbara Peterson, the president of Florida's First Amendment Foundation, notes that the easy access coupled with the sheer novelty makes these stories takes off. Quote, it's fun to say Florida man, both the fact that we do get access to that information information early on, but also the branding. And while Florida reporters can get these arrest reports quickly, reporters in other states typically have to file a request for an arrest record, which police can routinely deny despite their jurisdiction's purported open records laws. Arrest reports like, Florida man with drugs around penis denies they were his. Florida man arrested after hitting dad with pizza because he was mad he helped birth him. Florida man arrested for handing out marijuana because it was Christmas.
I mean, come on. I can't believe they arrested him for that. On Christmas.
In a 2019 editorial, Pennsylvania journalist Gil Smart explained the roadblocks to getting an arrest report in the Keystone State versus the Sunshine State. As Smart explained, Pennsylvania open records laws allow police to withhold information if it's considered part of a criminal investigation. And police would frequently claim that we can't give you the arrest report because it's part of the investigation. And even if police did produce documents, there was no way to know what volume of information was being upheld. But when Smart came to Florida, he was shocked by the ease with which journalists can get information. Quote, law enforcement provides you with his info as a matter of course, without complaining or throwing roadblocks in your way or claiming it's crucial info in an investigation. Just how easy was it for Smart to get these documents in Florida? Well, a local police agency started sending Smart daily arrest reports by email, something he didn't even sign up for or request before receiving them. Now, of course, the salaciousness and silliness of these tales of woe do lend themselves to a special kind of I'm so glad it's not me enjoyment. I mean, how else is one supposed to react to Florida man arrested for calling 911 after his kitten was denied entry into a strip club? It's easy to chuckle at some of these more frivolous sounding stories, but many of these headlines are deeply disturbing and violent, and critics of the Florida man phenomenon note that the punchline is often at the expense of Floridians with mental health issues and
Okay, well, if we're gonna ruin the fun,
severe drug dependency. Mental health issues and drug dependency issues like, oh, well, maybe that's not in such great taste. And it's easy to forget that every Florida man or Florida woman story involves real people, and it's important not to overlook the seriousness of their alleged crimes. Even the creator of the Florida Man Twitter account has regrets about his role in popularizing the meme. For 36-year-old Freddie Campion, who was raised in the United Kingdom, Florida represented a kind of pure, undiluted Americana. Quote, I never thought I was making fun of Florida because Florida is America. It's made up of people who moved here 5 years ago. Even when I think of Florida Man as a character, he moved to Florida after he faked his death in another state. By 2016, 36-year-old Freddie Campion, who was raised in the UK, feared he had lost control of the meme, noticing that, quote, 90% of the stories people were sending me were mean-spirited.
so that gets to the other what you can do. And in fact, I'm going to put this as the main what you can do. Don't make fun of Florida for Florida man. For two reasons. Number one, we should all want those open reporting laws. They genuinely will help make the country better if we all have open reporting like that. They also will help us identify dangerous trends before they kick off proper. I do wonder if we were saved by some degree from bath salts being a bigger deal than they were, because we literally learned about somebody eating somebody else's face when high on bath salts. This is a story that if I'm recalling correctly, and it's a mighty ballsy thing to say without looking up, I'll do it in a moment, but I believe that story came out of Florida. And it scared the hell out of all of us, and rightly so, and there was strong regulations put in place. We don't want to discourage a state, particularly one like Florida, which already has enough legal malfeasance, legislative malfeasance, to do away with a strong law. Reason number two is exactly what he's saying here. All these stories we're hearing, and we're laughing at the person involved being essentially real-life Dale Gribble. If you met Dale Gribble in real life, you'd feel bad for him because he's mentally unwell. Similarly, the people we're laughing at here most likely are mentally unwell. Even if they're just, fall down drunk. What's going on in that person's life that makes them fall down drunk and do these things? Fall down drunk on a Tuesday. on a Wednesday afternoon trying to get his cat into a strip club. Is his life going great? No. I just did laugh about him. I think it's okay to laugh about him. But laugh about it in the spirit of accepting how low we are, and know that we are laughing at ourselves and the society we've chosen to build that has such a person in it. Laugh about it with just a bit of guilt. So you keep the energy up. You do rightly chuckle at someone who is being buffoonish. And hopefully you feel bad enough about that laughter, and you feel bad enough about the state of things that you're inspired to then do something about it, so that there is not another person put in that position. Now let's continue with the maudlin part of this video.
In 2017, Campion briefly stopped posting, telling the Washington Post that the comedy felt stale and that he began questioning the ethics of what he was doing. Quote, "How much do I want to be a party to essentially making fun of people on their worst day of their lives, even if they have done something wrong? Like, who gave the internet the right to add to someone's punishment?" And now the Twitter account is retired, and Campion hopes that other people like himself are learning to be more responsible about what they share online, but he doesn't seem to be quite so optimistic. He said that, quote, "I'd still love to see Florida Man have a happy ending." And of course, it's worth noting that a lot of Florida Man stories come directly from arrest reports and other documents containing uncontested.
Just want to say, great question from John McDonough. Going to answer it in a moment.
Facts produced by the police. And of course, the police might have an axe to grind or a certain perspective to promote. And then news organizations that report what the police say without checking any other sources are complicit in this. And they, of course, get in the habit of simply parroting what the police tell them, which in the context of an uncontested case of Florida Man might not be the biggest deal, but it could become an issue when things are more contested in different contexts. So remember, next time you share a crazy Florida Man story, your state citizens are just as dumb and broken. Your laws are just less transparent.
Boom. Roasted.
Of course, it was good while it lasted. When the original Sunshine Amendment passed, the only major exceptions were for bank account numbers, social security numbers, and medical records. But Florida's leadership is actively chipping away at the Sunshine laws. Ron DeSantis is the first Florida governor to claim an executive privilege to keep certain government records secret. The Florida Constitution does not mention executive privilege of any kind, but a Florida trial judge has sided with DeSantis in applying the new privilege to shield emails related to how the governor screens judges.
If you want to know if you should have these laws in your state, look at the fact that Ron DeSantis is trying to wiggle out from under him right now. And that should tell you whether or not it's a good law to have. It's a great law to have. Transparency in government is so important. It also helps demystify the government. It makes the populace more educated. Nothing but good in that. I also want to point out what he said earlier about the danger of the media reporting what the police say when they have these open records laws. That same danger exists and is in fact worse. And I will tell you this from having lived it. In states that don't have these laws, if it is harder to get information out of the police, you will always get a story that leans more towards the favor of the police, and that's not good. It should be, the police should have to jump through hoops to prove that they weren't abusing citizens' rights. It should be a difficulty for them in their job, a necessary difficulty. And any time, I think a lot of times when people imagine the media failing at their job, what they're imagining is somebody being like, maybe I won't write this story, Mr. Mayor, if you give me $100. Ha, nice. I'm eating the ramen with chunks of real meat in it tonight. Have a good day. I'm not writing nothing. No. Aside from that, the person being quite poor, that was the only accurate thing about that. What it's really like is this. You write Mr. Mayor to try to get a piece of information. They tell you, you can't have it. Here's why. You say, Jesus Christ. Okay, you go back, you look at the time. You've got 5 hours to put your story together. Okay, well, he lied to me. He doesn't have that ability to deny the information. You copy the statute that says you have the right to the information. You resubmit your FOIA request. They wait an hour to get back to you. They get back to you and they partially fulfill it. You email them again because this is something they don't want to talk about. Generally, it's like when you're talking to your doctor. You're not there because things are going great, generally speaking. You're there because they got to deal with something. Well, the newsman's there because they got to deal with something. They write back and say, or as the newsman, you write back and you say, you didn't give me all the information. They write you back and say, we gave you all we're required to. Go back, you look up the statute. Nope. Here's the clause that says you have to give me yada, yada, yada. And by the time you get all the information, it's 45 minutes before you'd have to put the whole story together and edit it and do the voiceover, all of that. And you're looking at that and staying probably late tonight versus how big the story is going to be anyway versus the story you already had saved up and ready to go that you could just play because it's your backup story that you did in case you didn't get this one done in time. Where the corruption happens is right in that moment. Whether or not the news person then has the strength to say, no, I worked hard for this story. I think this story is important. I think my audience has a right to know about it. I'm going to put this story out. God damn it. Right. Furiously quick. Record the things fast as you can. Dang it, you said the wrong person in the story. You re-record. Okay, you edit. 5 minutes. Oh, Jesus. What time am I on in the actual show? Okay, I'm on in the B block. That means I have another 10 minutes to export this. Export error. Dang it. Go back in. Restart computer. Wait. Look at the clock. Export. Done. Get it to production. Nick of time it gets in. If you're in a state like Florida, where the laws are crystal clear, and it's going to tire the mayor out and the mayor's office more to fight it, or the police chief more to fight it than it is you, the reporter. Suddenly, that looking at the clock and feeling tired at the end of the day, suddenly that's on the people who would be tempted to cover something up, rather than the people who are trying to motivate themselves to uncover corruption. Get those laws in your state.
DeSantis has already signed several bills limiting access to information about police and police methods. And in 2023, the Florida legislature has already introduced over 60 bills that would create exceptions to Florida's Public Records Acts. One of the new exceptions would prohibit the agency which provides security for DeSantis from disclosing any details about his travel arrangements, even for trips that are already covered. And another would allow courts to seal eviction proceedings upon request of landlords or tenants. And in 2022, DeSantis signed a law creating an exception for information about candidates for college and university presidencies. So Florida's exceptional sunshine law may be as endangered as, I don't know, some sort of animal that's endangered in Florida, the hawksbill sea turtle or something like that. Of course, the information that Florida has made public will live online forever, but unlike all of the Florida people, you can get your online personal data taken down with today's sponsor, Incognito.
Oh my God.
Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen...
He snuck it in there. Kudos. Ooh, he's smooth. One day, your old pal Jake will get there. All right, so what can you do? Number one, don't judge Florida for Florida man stories. Judge away for DeSantis nonsense, absolutely. But don't judge Florida for Florida man stories. Remember, we only know about them because that state has good public reporting laws. Second, tell your state representatives that you want open record laws as strong as Florida's Sunshine Act. There's a link in the description. You can contact your representatives. It's that same link we use frequently, commoncause.org. What that does is let you know everyone who represents you, just in case you haven't used it before. It's great to save as a bookmark because it tells you everyone who represents you from the little bitty state level all the way to the national level. And it provides you with a way to get in touch with them. Use the link, find your state representatives, people who represent you within your state, and tell them that you want open records laws as strong as Florida's Sunshine Act. Let's hope Florida keeps its own Sunshine Act intact because it's great. That's a fact. Couldn't resist at the end there. Great question from John McDonough. I want to talk about. What do you do when the political stuff gets to you? The cult gathering in Waco, Trump, more whiny than usual, Green playing fool, the MAGA freak show, Jordan, Comer, Bozaberts. Oh, I like that. Bozaberts, AR-15, lapel pin. Yeah, it can be exhausting. And by the way, that's their strategy. That is, look, it ain't just thrown around dramatic terms. That is literally the fascist strategy. They try to exhaust the decent people. That is how a minority, which fascists basically every time they take power, they are a minority. That is how a minority of the political power ends up, that is how a minority political power takes control. It's to exhaust us. It's actually not too hard to combat. Number one, understand that this craziness that you see is seen by all. Number two, pay close attention to when the benchmarks are. When's the next benchmark? 2024. That is the next opportunity we're going to have to shift the political power in this country in a definite way. So if you're not looking at it like, will this be the rest of my life, but you're looking at it like, will this be the next year of my life? It becomes something very different. And then going into another comment that we had, because it's relevant to your comment, John. JFJ Live says, how about make America better now? Which starts with taking down the Trump crime family. Exactly. How do you prevent yourself from getting overwhelmed? You take action. You don't need to win the whole fight. You need to get a couple of good punches in to get your spirit back. Why is Trump acting so crazy? Because of some of the victories we've already achieved. The Justice Department of yesteryear would have been happy to ignore Trump's crime spree. Would have been delighted to ignore Trump's crime spree, in fact. But because of the hard work put in by you and folks like you, we had the January 6th committee able to do what they did because of voting in 2020. We had the numbers necessary to put together that committee. We had the political will necessary to put together that committee. Why are all these state-level folks charging Trump or appearing to be on the eve of charging Trump? I'm on indictment watch every single day now. Why is that? Because the political will was there. Alvin Bragg, in part, campaigned on an assurance that powerful people would not get separate treatment. Why did he feel that that was necessary to campaign on? Because people like you were out there demanding it. Just because the job's not done Don't let it make you feel like no work has been done. Like it's not 75% of the way there. The worst of it is the unpunished crimes. It appears that we are on the eve of a massive victory for justice in the United States. So celebrate the wins. That is how you get ready to fight again. You celebrate the wins. You savor it. And also, look at what has become of the Republican Party. Look at what has become of the party which has orchestrated the vast majority of the problems we deal with today. Global warming's out of control. That's thanks to the Republican Party in large part. In fact, just assume I said in large part for all of this, and add in the fact that the centrist Democrats are also complicit. But mostly, for talking platforms, global warming is a massive problem now because of the GOP, Republican Party. Out of control guns in the United States, GOP. Poor health care in the country, GOP. Weak labor laws, GOP. And on and on and on and on. And look at what has become of that party. They are now treacherous clowns. And it's obvious to everyone. And if you're concerned that it's only going to get worse and that we're not making any progress, bear in mind the American voter rejected Donald Trump in 2020 before January 6th, 2021. Before that. They're not going to vote him back into office now after January 6th. They are certainly not, as more and more and more comes out. And my suspicion, to give you a little bit of energy, my suspicion is that the American people have wisened up enough to understand that Ron DeSantis is no different, that Nikki Haley, fundamentally, in terms of the things she will support, the legislation she will try to pass, is no different. None of them are different. By trying to appeal to the worst among us, Republicans have shown what they really are. Continual pressure from us towards good. Small acts, not massive acts. Small but consistent acts. Writing emails, making phone calls, writing the occasional old-fashioned letter, giving $5 to this or that campaign. This has a cumulative effect, and it's working. What you are doing now, watching shows like this, getting educated, it's working. We just have to keep it up. We are on the eve, I suspect, if we can keep up the sort of pressure we have been doing, we are on the eve of a genuinely wonderful time in the United States of America. All of the worst things we deal with now got set in stone with the success of Ronald Reagan's political career. That was the beginning of a winning streak for Republicans that was so thorough, it affected how Democrats ran for office and conducted themselves in office. I think the opposite is in the chamber. America has seen what the GOP is. America doesn't care for it. So what can you do to keep your energy up? Celebrate your victories. We've already had some major ones. Understand that you're not the only one that sees them acting this way. And have a little bit of faith. Not a ton, but a little bit of faith that other Americans see what you see. And if you suspect they don't see what you see, invite them to. Invite them to Friday Peace Talks. Show them where you saw your information. Share a clip with somebody. Invite them to share their clips with you. And if you want help responding to them, send them to me. I'll give you my thoughts. But just understand, the process of winning the fight, not when you've won the fight, but the process of winning the fight involves still fighting. And I sympathize. It's exhausting. But you're part of a good group of people right now. This community is wonderful. I'm proud to have been lucky enough, frankly, to exist at a time when you all could gather in this place. I'm delighted to, once in a while, tell you what you can do. Lean on this community as much as anything. We'll be here for you just like you're here for us. John McDonough says, yes, that helps to understand these are all tactics, so keep up the pressure. Hell yeah, I get it. I believe everything you are saying, but it is exhausting. Yeah, it is, 100%. But we'll try to have some chuckles too, because one fun thing about fighting fascists is that your enemy is a damn clown, and that's always fun to tease. Well, I have had a wonderful time talking with y'all tonight. I'm going to desperately try to recreate this setup as I dog sit tomorrow and for a couple days after. Hopefully, Alvin Bragg will be kind enough to wait for me to get back to the proper studio before he lets the indictments go. But don't wait on me, actually. I don't even want to jinx that. There's some wood to knock on. Don't even want to jinx that. But regardless, we will have content for you every day this week. I look forward to seeing you then. This has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. My name's Jake.